Hey everyone, welcome back to our Sky Tonight program. My name is Seth Mayo. I'm the curator of astronomy for the Lowman Planetarium, and in this week's episode, we're covering the dates of May 17th through May 23rd. We're going to start things off by talking about the planets and what you can see off towards the west, and even in the morning as well. Then, we're going to talk about the moon next to a really beautiful star cluster, and we'll end things with the rising of a bright summer star known as Vega towards the east. So, let's get to it. Now, right at the beginning of this week, on Monday the 17th, if you're looking towards the west, right after sunset, you do have a chance to see the planet Mercury, the smallest planet in our solar system and the closest one to our sun. Now, Mercury never strays too far from the sun. In previous episodes, I talked about how close it is to the sun, about a third of the distance that we are to it, and moves around the sun very quickly in only about 88 days, so just under 3 of our months. It moves so quickly. It's why it's named after the messenger god, the Roman messenger god, because that was a god that moved so quickly. And Mercury does move very quickly between the western sky and the eastern sky, never straying too far from the sun. So on the 17th, if you're looking just above the western horizon, a little bit after sunset, you might have a chance to see this planet. Now, it is very low and near the sun, so you do have to be careful with the sun's glare. And unfortunately, our planetarium software here, Stellarium, has a digital tree in the way, so we're going to need to remove that, which we can do, which is not a big deal. And we can see a little more of the horizon. So just imagine the horizon is right here. There's the sun below the horizon, which of course we wouldn't see by this time. This is after 8 o'clock here, local time. And if we look carefully, we'll zoom in a little bit. This is actually the planet Venus. Now, Venus right now, which is usually the brightest planet in the sky, is just too close to the sun to see easily. So that one's a little tough, but it is rising a little higher and higher from the sun. Will get a little easier to see later on in the year, especially in the summertime. But just above it is this planet right here, which again is Mercury. So Mercury on the 17th is at what's called greatest eastern elongation, or greatest elongation east, which means that Mercury is most east of the sun right now. When it's at greatest elongation west, then it would be on the other side of the sky in the morning. So when it's at this point in its orbit, it's highest up in the evening sky just after sunset. So if you have a really clear view of the west and there's no clouds, any bad weather, then you might have a chance to glimpse this in this part of the sky, which is quite nice to see this speedy little planet that exists so close to our sun. Now, looking a little higher in the sky, we still have a chance to see the planet which we've talked a whole bunch about, and that is the planet Mars. So let's turn the horizon back on here, and we'll deselect Mercury. If we look a little higher up, we can see this little red dot right there, and there is the planet Mars. Now, Mars has been getting dimmer and smaller in the sky because we are moving farther away from it. Late last year, we were at its closest approach when we swung by Mercury in October, so it was really big and bright then, and ever since then, we've been moving farther and farther away from it. But it's still visible, and what you have been noticing is that Mars has been moving through the constellation of Gemini. These are the Gemini twins right here, which we'll turn on just so you can see the outline. And so it continues that trekward through the twins, but overall, this area is moving towards the west as we go around the sun. So you're going to see less and less of Mars as we head into the summertime. And eventually, as we get into the fall, Mars will be obscured by the sun when we're on the opposite side of the sun than where Mars is. So all of these orbital dynamics with the planets are going on. It's kind of interesting to follow along with it. If you're out on that same night, on the 17th on Monday, there's another treat in this area as well. If we look even a bit above Mars, which again is inside Gemini, you'll find the crescent moon. And this is one of my favorite phases of the moon. It just looks really nice. It's not too bright, so it's great to look at through a telescope or even binoculars. But speaking of looking at objects through binoculars, there's something really great on this evening that is next to the moon that is wonderful to observe. So it's hard to see at the moment, but if we zoom in a little bit, and we'll get a little bit closer to the moon here, on this night, you'll find that our crescent moon is next to a beautiful cluster of stars right here. It's actually a very famous open cluster of stars called Prasepe, which means the manger. It's also very well known as M44, the Messier designation for this cluster of stars. This has been a very popular cluster that astronomers through history have looked at and studied. The stars are really bright, and when you do look at it through binoculars, you just see so many. Because this is such a wide field of a star cluster, binoculars are actually a bit better than using a telescope. A telescope has such a narrow field of view. So you can see all of those stars, or at least a whole bunch of them, and they're really bright and vibrant, and there are many of them in this area. So it's great that the moon is nearby, and if you have a really wide field, there may be a chance to capture both of these things in your view, which is quite nice. So I love seeing the moon next to these types of star clusters that may take a little more deeper observation, but if you do capture it, it looks really cool. So let's fly this cluster to take a better look at it. Here in Space Engine, we can take a closer look at this beautiful grouping of stars. And Persepi is also known as the beehive cluster. It does look like a hive of bees in the sky, this kind of nebulous sort of dim thing of these stars here. So it has that name as well. And as we fly to it, this cluster has tons of stars. It's located around 600 light years away. So that means the light from these stars takes approximately 600 years or so, give or take possibly 50, 60 light years on either side. And that's actually considered one of the closest open clusters to us, and one of the most populated of stars. And what we found so far is that there are many red giant stars in the cluster and white dwarfs, which means there are many stars in this area that are a bit older and have lived through most of their lives. So there's a lot of older generation type of stars within the beehive or the Persepi cluster, and it may be associated with something called the Hyades in Taurus. Taurus has a big V shape in its nose, and that cluster may be related to this one here. A lot of times that's the case, and they kind of drift apart over time. So this star cluster is an amazing group of stars that we can find near the crescent moon on the 17th, but when the moon is not out, it's also good to look at because you do get a little bit of light pollution from the moon when it's that close. So when the moon moves away, it's also great at that point as well, and take a look at it with binoculars. It is a beautiful sight, and you'll see tons of stars in your field of view, which is always worth it. At this time of the year, as we see the spring stars straight up in the sky right after sunset, and some of those leftover winter constellations setting in the west, if we look to the east, we're starting to see a few of those summer objects in the northern hemisphere start to peak. And one famous summer star in particular rising in the eastern part of the sky is that of Vega, which we find right there. And Vega is part of a tiny little constellation called Lyra the Harp. So if you do stay up past 9 o'clock, especially around the 9:30 time frame here, you will see Vega and its small constellation that it is a part of. And Vega is really a very, very bright star. It is the 5th brightest star in our sky, and it is the 2nd brightest star in the northern hemisphere sky, behind the star Arcturus, which we find a bit higher in the sky later in the evening, right up here. So Vega really stands out. It's one of the corner stars of the summer triangle as well. The summer triangle, a very famous shape that we find more and more, of course, during the summer months. Vega is a really interesting star with an interesting shape, so we'll take a look at this as well in Space Engine. So Vega is actually one of the closer stars to us at about 25 light years away. That's still, of course, very far for distances that we relate to, but for stars in the sky, that's a close neighbor, and that's another reason why this star is so bright. But as we get a little closer to it, it is a bright white and slightly bluish star. So that means it's hotter than the sun, and it's a star that's about twice as massive and about 2.3 to 2.8 times the size of our sun. And since it's more massive and it's hotter, it's burning through its fuel, its hydrogen, much more quickly than our sun. Our sun is expected to live for about 10 billion years. This star, Vega, is going to only live for 1 billion years, a tenth of the sun's age. And right now, it's about halfway into its life, just like our sun as well. Vega is about 455 million years old. So this star is kind of the halfway point in its life. Eventually, when it does die in another 500 million years or so, it's going to blow it up into a red giant star and then cast its gas into space into what's called a planetary nebula. and leave behind a white dwarf. But for now, it's a pretty massive white bluish star. And one thing that's really interesting is its shape, and you can kind of see it here in Space Engine. You'll notice it almost looks football shaped, right? So what's happening with this star is it's spinning very rapidly, and from Earth we're actually seeing it from the pole. And so it's spinning around its pole at about 236 kilometers per second, or at least at the equator. That's how fast that is. Just to put that in miles per hour, that's about 527,000 miles per hour, approximately. So it's spinning very rapidly, and due to centrifugal forces, it's actually making it bulge out at the equator. So it turns it into kind of a football-shaped star, which is quite interesting to see. And so some stars do that, spin very rapidly. Our sun spins in about a month and much more slowly than Vega, so it doesn't have that extreme stretching. It has a little bit of it, but not nearly as much as a star like this. And what's pretty exciting is very recently this star was discovered to possibly have a planet going around it, a Neptune-sized planet that goes around it about every 2 days, so it means it's very close to the star. There may be another planet, the mass of Saturn, a little bit farther out from the star, but that hasn't been confirmed just yet. But so far, astronomers believe they have found at least one planet around Vega, which is interesting. And what's also been noticed is a lot of infrared light coming from this. And what's happening, at least what astronomers think, is that there is a debris field around the star, basically like an asteroid belt, and that gives off infrared light. And so you get excess infrared light coming from this area, which may indicate that. And we've seen that with other stars as well, but Vega is a good example of something with excess infrared light, possibly from debris from an asteroid belt around it. And that's possibly a material that may have been left over from the formation of the star. Much like our own solar system, the leftover stuff that never made it into the sun eventually became the planets, the asteroids, comets, moons, and us as well. So you see similar things around other stars, including the star Vega. So if you're out a little later in the evening, you look towards the eastern part of the sky, maybe northeast, depending where you are, definitely take a look at Vega, a bright star that kind of ushers in the beginning of summertime, or at least lets you know that summer is around the corner. And if you stay up really late, you may even see more of the summer triangle, those 3 stars that make up that large asterism in the sky that we talk a lot about as well. Hey, that's it for another edition of our Sky Tonight program. Thank you for tuning in. And if you're in the area, please stop on by the Loman Planetarium. We're running shows every day. We'd love to see you there. And check out our website for more information. And as always, take care and happy stargazing.